Well, good morning. Happy Friday. As I see it, we can go one of two ways during this quarantine. We can take the path of feeling entitled to have things back the way they once were, or we can be grateful for how God is shaping us for a new future. Two different paths to take. We can go the path of feeling entitled to have things back the way they were. And come on, God, get them back to the way things were. Or we can be grateful for how God is shaping us for a new future, because that, in fact, is the road that He wants us to take. So the question becomes, what are you grateful for now that you were not grateful for previously? I remember yesterday what we did is we said, make a gratitude list. Well, let's develop that a little bit. What are you grateful of that gratitude list? What are you grateful for now that you were not grateful for previously? I think when we begin to recognize that, we start seeing that how God is shaping us for a new future. Well, this devotional really could be called Mary Magdalene Part 2. It's Magdalene is not her last name. It was where she was from. Mary was from Magdala. As we look in chapter 20, we read it in chapter 20, verses 11 through 18. I'm going to read those again, but I want to make three observations about Mary that are really, I think, insightful. First of all, look at chapter 20, verse 11 through 14. But Mary was standing outside the tomb weeping, and so, as she wept, she stooped and looked into the tomb, and she beheld two angels in white sitting there, one on the head and one on the feet, and where the body of Jesus had been lying. And they said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? And she said to them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. Verse 14. But when she had said this, she turned around, and behold, Jesus was standing there, and she did not know that it was Jesus. She didn't realize it was Jesus. So the question becomes, well, why didn't she recognize him? Well, some have said, well, maybe because her eyes were filled with tears, and so her eyes were cloudy and she couldn't see. Why didn't I personally think the reason she didn't recognize him is quite simply she didn't expect to see him. You don't expect to see somebody that's still dead. But I think this interchange is not so much about Mary. I think this interchange is more about Jesus. Because Jesus chooses to appear to Mary over the disciples, over the Caiaphases of the world, over the Pilates of the world. In spite of the fact no author at this time or any time would have come up with a former demonically controlled person as the first recipient of seeing Jesus, much less she was a woman. I think it reveals about Jesus the reason he revealed himself to her, because she was the least intimidated to be seen with him. Let me kind of try to build a case for that. It was said about her that she was the last one at the cross and the first one at the tomb on that first Easter morning. And the question comes is, are you okay to be seen with Jesus? Peter initially denied knowing Jesus 3 times because he was intimidated by being recognized as having been with Jesus. Later on, I think God broke him of that. We see in Acts that the very reason that the apostles were arrested was because they had been recognized as being seen with Jesus. Are you okay with being recognized as being seen with Jesus? You think, well, how's that possible? Well, you can spend time with Jesus every morning, every night before you go to bed, every morning you wake up. You can spend time with Jesus. And the more we spend time with Jesus in our devotional life, people will recognize us as having been with Jesus. So the question becomes, are you okay with having been recognized as having been with Jesus? Here's my second observation. It's found in verses 15 and 16. It says, Jesus said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? And again, Mary doesn't recognize him yet. She thinks he's the gardener. And she said to him, Well, sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away. And then verse 16, Jesus said to her, Mary. He said it to her in a way that he had probably said it to her several times, where he would see her and say, Hi, Mary. An affectionate way of saying, Hey, follower. There's my friend. She turned and said to him, she recognized him, Rabboni, which means teacher. You know, when Jesus said Mary, I think there was a fond affection there. You know, Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 13, the sheep will know the voice of their shepherd. And Mary recognized the voice of her shepherd. Here's another question. Do you spend enough time with Jesus that you know his voice? Do you spend enough time with Jesus that you know his voice? Again, God enables us to spend time with him. Yeah, his voice isn't audible, but you know what? You begin to recognize his words that flow out of the scriptures to us that you go, wait a minute, I want to hear this more than I hear the words of the culture. And so do you spend enough time with Jesus to know his voice and to hear it over hearing the words of the culture? Here's my third observation. It comes out of verses 17 and 18. And so she throws herself at his feet. She's hanging onto his feet. And Jesus said to her, stop clinging to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brethren and say to them, I ascend to my Father and my God and your God. In verse 18, and Mary Magdalene came announcing to the disciples, she did what he asked her to do. I have seen the Lord, and that he said these things to her. So she reported all the things that Jesus said. You know, have you ever read that and you gone, why did Jesus say, don't hold on to me? You know, there may be some sort of spiritual reality to him that, hey, don't cling to me. But I don't think it's because he'll turn into a pumpkin if you hold on to him too long. I think there's something that Jesus is trying to break us of. See, things are changing, he's communicating. Where he had previously been with them on a daily basis physically, from now on, he's saying to them, I'm going to be with you spiritually. So he is setting her up, as well as he's setting all the disciples up, that there's a change. There's a transition. The transition needs to be, we need to be spiritually dependent on him and not physically dependent on him. I think if he was saying to us, stop clinging to me physically, it's saying, hey, you, let's relate it to us today. You, church, believers in Jesus Christ, we are going to have to learn to trust what we cannot see and touch. Why? Because he wants us to walk by faith, not by sight. See, I think Jesus is going from a major transition where they have walked by sight. And now he's teaching them that, you know what, no longer am I going to be with you physically. You, believers, are going to have to walk by faith. Later in this very same chapter, in chapter 20, verse 29, he says the statement, blessed are those who see and believe, but more blessed are those that don't see and believe. Because from this point forward, all followers, they're going to follow him not based upon what they can see, but what they cannot see. And so he's making a major transition with his apostles, with his followers. In 2 Corinthians 5:7, Paul says it this way, we've got to walk by faith, not by sight. You know, during this period of time, God is teaching us to walk by faith. We like to go to what we can see. Well, we can turn on the news. We can see CNN. We can see Fox. We can see everything. Are we going to walk by what we can see? Or are we going to walk by faith? See, God is asking us to live by what he is teaching us rather than by what we can see. See, God entered us into a war. And the battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the principalities. It's against the forces of wickedness in the spiritual darkness. We can't see that. But that's where God has asked us to do battle for him. So the question becomes, what is God teaching you during this time to help you walk by faith? It's a pretty abstract question, so parents, you may need to help out your kids on this one. But it's a good question to wrestle with. God wants us to walk by faith. If we just walked by what we could see, it'd be pretty desperate. We'd be pretty at wit's end. But we've got the hope of the gospel. You remember what we said on Tuesday. A future without Jesus, well, that leads to anxiety. Anytime we worry, anytime we fret, it's because we're looking at the world without Jesus. God wants us to walk by faith. Why? Because He is in our future. So trust in Him. Walk by faith. What are you learning in this walk by faith? Have a great weekend. Can't wait to see you on Sunday. Again, I'm going to be talking about communication within the context of your family and hopefully giving you principles to live by that'll aid you in your most important earthly relationships. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Sunday.